You have no business being at your sister's wedding. None. You'll embarrass this entire family just by showing up. Those were my father's exact words. I remember them perfectly because I was standing in the kitchen of my parents' house in Oakville, still wearing my coat, still holding a bottle of wine I'd brought as a peace offering. My younger sister's engagement party had just wrapped up. The guests were gone. It was just the four of us, my parents, my sister, and me. And my father had apparently decided that was the right moment to have this particular conversation. My name is Vivienne Laroche, and I was 31 years old when my family decided I was too much of a failure to attend my own sister's wedding. To understand how we got there, you need to understand what my family valued. My father spent 35 years in financial consulting. My mother taught high school French and spent the other half of her life making sure everyone within a 20-kilometer radius knew about it. In their world, success had a very specific shape. It had a university degree, preferably from McGill or Queen's. It had a stable salary, benefits, a pension. It looked good at dinner parties and could be explained in a single sentence. My sister, Camille, fit that shape exactly. She was an occupational therapist. Steady work, respectable income, a fiancé who was finishing his residency in internal medicine. She was the version of a daughter my parents had always wanted. I was the other version. At 22, I left my business administration program at Western University 1 year before finishing. Not because I failed. Not because I couldn't keep up. I left because I had already started something that was taking up every hour. I wasn't sleeping. A small food business that had begun as a side project and quietly outgrown everything around it. I had started making artisan preserves and charcuterie boards out of my apartment kitchen, selling to local markets on weekends. And by my 3rd year of university, I had more orders than I could fill and a waiting list I was embarrassed to tell anyone about. I told my family I was taking a break from school to pursue something I was building. My father asked, what exactly I was building? I told him. He looked at me the way people look at something they don't know how to categorize. Then he told me I was making a mistake. My mother said nothing, which in her case meant she agreed with him completely. Over the years that followed, I stopped talking about the business around them. It was easier. Every time I mentioned it, my father would bring up job stability, or ask whether I'd considered going back to finish my degree, or say something like, that sounds like more of a hobby than a career. So I stopped offering the information. Stopped asking. We settled into a polite silence on the subject. What they didn't know, what I never told them, was that by the time I was 27, the business had grown into something I hadn't fully planned for. What started as preserves and charcuterie had expanded into a full catering operation, then into a small production facility in Hamilton, and eventually into a flagship restaurant in downtown Toronto that I had opened quietly the previous year with 2 business partners. We were doing weekend brunches, weeknight dinners, a private event space on the upper floor. By my 31st birthday, we had a James Beard adjacent mention in a national food magazine, a growing wholesale line in 43 independent grocery stores across Ontario and Quebec, and a team of 26 people. My parents thought I was still selling things at farmers markets. I had never corrected them. Every time a holiday came around and my mother asked how things were going, I said fine. When my aunt asked if I was seeing anyone and mentioned in the same breath that I should really think about settling down into something stable, I smiled and said I was keeping busy. When my father said 2 Christmases ago that he hoped I had a backup plan, I said I was managing. The engagement party was in April. Camille had been engaged for 3 months, and the wedding was set for the last weekend of August, at a venue in Niagara-on-the-Lake that my parents had insisted on booking, a restored heritage property called Stonebridge House that did about 60 weddings a year and had a long wait list. It was exactly the kind of place my mother would have chosen. Grand enough to impress. Traditional enough to feel appropriate. What no one mentioned at the engagement party, what I only found out later, because my mother told me in passing, as though it were a minor logistical detail, was that the catering for the reception had been contracted to a local company called Table. That was my company. My business partner, a woman named Petra, who handled most of our event-side communications, had taken the Stonebridge booking 8 months earlier. The bride's name was Camille. The family name on the contract was La Roche. Petra had not connected it to me because she had no reason to. I had never mentioned that La Roche was my family name. I had built the company under it before my family ever became complicated. And somewhere along the way, I had simply never explained the connection to anyone at work. I found out the night of the engagement party, and I said nothing. The conversation that changed things happened later. That same evening, once the wine was finished and the house had gone quiet, my father brought up the seating arrangement for the wedding. Camille mentioned there was a table near the back she thought might work for me. My father cleared his throat. He said he'd been thinking. He said he was worried about the impression I might make on some of the guests, particularly on her fiancé's family, who were coming in from Vancouver. He said things like professional image and the kind of people you want in the room. He said he thought it might be better for Camille's sake if I sat this one out. Camille looked at the floor. She didn't agree out loud. She also didn't disagree. My mother said very gently that she knew it was a hard thing to hear, but that I had to understand this day was about Camille. I looked at my father. I waited for him to realize what he was saying. He didn't. He looked entirely comfortable with it. I picked up my coat. I said goodnight. I drove back to Toronto. For the next 3 months, I didn't call. No one called me either. My sister sent a text in June asking if I was okay. I told her I was fine, and that I hoped the planning was going well. She replied with a heart emoji. That was the full extent of our contact. I want to be clear about something. I wasn't sitting at home devastated. I was busy. The restaurant had been nominated for a local hospitality award, our wholesale accounts were expanding into British Columbia, and we were in the early stages of a second location in Ottawa. There was a lot to manage, and I threw myself into it entirely, which was not difficult because I genuinely loved the work. I always had. That was the part my family had never understood, or perhaps never tried to. But I would be lying if I said it didn't hurt. It did. There is something specific about being excluded from your own family. By your own family, that sits differently than other kinds of rejection. It doesn't disappear just because you're busy. It just goes quiet for stretches of time and then surfaces unexpectedly. In the middle of a Tuesday, or when you're driving home in the rain, or when you see someone at a farmer's market with their mother and you have to look away. The weekend of the wedding arrived in late August. I was working. The Saturday service at the restaurant was fully booked, and we had a private event in the upper dining room. A corporate dinner for a pharmaceutical company that had been on the books for months. I was in the kitchen by 9 in the morning. Around noon, Petra came to find me. She had a slightly careful look on her face. The one she used when she had something to say that she wasn't entirely sure how to frame. She told me that the LaRoche family wedding at Stonebridge House had run into a situation. The catering company that had originally been contracted, a different firm, not us, had lost their health certification 3 weeks earlier following a regional inspection, and Stonebridge had reached out to us as an emergency replacement. Petra had accepted because we had the capacity and a pre-existing relationship with the venue, and it had all moved quickly. She had managed the onboarding herself. She said she had only realized this morning, when the event sheet crossed her desk, that the bride's surname was the same as mine. She asked carefully whether I knew the family. I was quiet for a moment. Then I told her yes. I told her they were my family. She stared at me. I told her we were going to handle it exactly the way we would handle any other event. I told her the food would be perfect and the service would be professional, and nothing about the day would be affected by my personal relationship to the guest list. Petra is not someone who rattles easily. She nodded and went back to coordinating. We arrived at Stonebridge House at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. My team, 6 of us, came in through the service entrance, the way we always did. We set up in the estate kitchen. We worked through the pre-ceremony window efficiently, quietly, the way any professional operation does when they have a timeline and 4 courses to execute. The ceremony was in the garden. I stayed in the kitchen. My family was approximately 40 meters away and had no idea I was there. Reception began at 6. Guests moved into the main hall. The first course went out at 6:40. My team was composed. The food was good. I knew it was good because I had developed every component of the menu myself, the same way I developed every seasonal menu we ran at the restaurant. I was standing near the pass when it happened. One of the servers came back and said quietly that someone from the head table was asking to speak with the chef. I assumed it was a dietary concern. It happens sometimes. I dried my hands on a side towel, pulled my jacket straight, and walked out. The head table was arranged along the far wall of the hall, elevated slightly on a low riser. Camille was in the center in her dress, which was ivory and very simple, in a way that suited her. Her husband was beside her. My mother and father were at the end of the table, nearest to where I was standing. My father was the one who had asked. He wanted to compliment the kitchen on the beef tenderloin. He was telling the server this when I came through the door, and he was mid-sentence when he looked up and stopped. The expression on his face is something I will not try to describe in detail because I don't think I have the right words for it. It was not a single emotion. It moved through several in the space of about 3 seconds. My mother noticed his expression before she saw me. She turned. She went completely still. I stood there in my chef's jacket with the company name embroidered on the chest. La Roche Table. The same name that was on the wedding contract. The same name that was on the invoice my parents had presumably signed somewhere in the planning process without connecting it. Camille saw me next. She made a small sound, almost involuntary. I said quietly that I was glad they were enjoying the dinner. I said the kitchen would continue as planned, and that they should let us know if there was anything the table needed. Then I turned and walked back through the door. I did not stop moving until I was back at the pass. My hands were completely steady. I was aware of my own heartbeat in an oddly detached way, like I was observing it from a slight distance. Petra looked at me once. I shook my head. She looked back at her clipboard. We continued service. The second course went out. The third course went out. Dessert was plated and delivered. By 9:30, the kitchen was broken down and the team was loading the van. I was carrying a crate of equipment toward the back door when my father appeared in the service corridor. He was not wearing his dinner jacket. He had come through the kitchen entrance alone. For a moment, he stood at the end of the corridor, and we looked at each other across about 15 feet of linoleum. He said my name. I set the crate down on a counter and waited. He looked around the kitchen, at the equipment, at the team members quietly finishing their work, at the pass, at the shelving, at the organized efficiency of the breakdown. He looked at all of it in a way that made me understand he was recalibrating something. Then he said, "How long?" I knew what he meant. I said the restaurant had been open for just over a year. I said the company had been operating for 9 years. He didn't say anything for a moment. I told him about the production facility. I told him about the wholesale accounts. I told him about the Ottawa location we were opening in the spring. I didn't say it to impress him. I said it because he had asked, and because for 9 years he had never asked, and because I was tired of calibrating what I shared to manage other people's comfort. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. He said he had no idea. I told him I knew that. I told him I had tried, a few times, early on. I reminded him of the conversation at the kitchen table in Oakville, when I was 23, the one where he told me I was making a mistake. I reminded him of the Christmas, where he said he hoped I had a backup plan. He listened without interrupting, which was not something he did often. Then he said he was sorry. He didn't dress it up or explain it. He just said he was sorry. He said he had been wrong about what he assumed, and wrong about what he had said at the engagement party, and wrong about a lot of things he hadn't said out loud, but had thought clearly enough that I had probably felt it anyway. I appreciated it. I want to be honest about that. I did appreciate it. But an apology is not a revision of history. It doesn't undo the engagement party or the years of Christmas dinners where I sat quietly while Camille's career was discussed and mine was treated like an awkward topic to skip past. It acknowledges something that happened. That's different from erasing it. My mother came through the door about 10 minutes later. She had been crying, which I could see clearly. She held both of my hands in hers and said she was so proud of me, and I let her say it, and I held her hands. And I meant it when I said thank you. But I noticed something standing in that service corridor that I hadn't quite put into words before. Their pride, both of them, had a quality to it that was connected to the evidence in the room. The equipment, the team, the contract, the embroidered jacket. It was easier to feel proud once the proof was visible, and I understood that. I really did. But what I had needed, 10 years ago and 8 years ago, and 5 years ago and 2 Christmases ago, was not proof. It was a question. Just someone asking what I was building, and then actually listening. That was what had been missing. Not the pride. The curiosity. Camille found me in the parking lot when I was loading the last of the van. She was still in her wedding dress, which seemed wildly impractical for a gravel lot in the dark. But that was entirely in character for her. She had always done things her own way, and just expected the world to accommodate the dress. She wrapped her arms around me and didn't say anything for a while. Then she said she was sorry for not standing up at the engagement party. She said she had known it was wrong and had told herself she would fix it later, and later had kept not arriving. I told her I wasn't angry at her, and I wasn't, not really. I was something more like tired of the pattern, which is a different thing. She asked if I would come for Christmas. I told her I'd think about it. She seemed to understand that was a real answer, not a deflection. We stood in the parking lot for another few minutes while the van idled and her husband waited at the door with her wrap. Then she went back inside, and I climbed into the passenger seat, and Petra drove us back toward Toronto on the QEW with the radio on low, and neither of us talking. Somewhere around Burlington, she said, without looking away from the highway, that she had a feeling from the beginning that this was not a straightforward booking. I said I probably should have mentioned the family connection earlier. She said probably. We left it at that. In the weeks after the wedding, my father called twice. My mother called once and left a message that was longer than it needed to be, but came from a real place, and I called her back. We had a conversation that was more honest than any I could remember having with her in years. She asked about the business, not performatively, but with actual questions. She wanted to know how I had started it, and what the production facility looked like, and whether I liked running a team. I told her. She listened. It was not a transformation. I don't believe in transformations, at least not the sudden kind. What it was a beginning of something different, a version of a relationship that might eventually include the truth on both sides, if we were patient enough with it. I don't think about the engagement party conversation very often anymore. What I think about occasionally is the moment I walked back through that kitchen door after seeing my father's face. My hands steady, my team in place. The next course ready to go. There is a specific kind of peace that comes from knowing, completely, that what you have built does not depend on anyone else's recognition to be real. I had known it before the wedding. The wedding just gave it a different kind of weight. My father called me uneducated and aimless for years without quite saying those words. He implied them in 100 small ways, and I heard every single one. But the thing about building something real is that it exists whether or not the right people have seen it yet. The restaurant was there before they knew about it. The team was there. The orders were there. The work was there. Their discovery of it didn't make it more true. It only made it visible to them. And the part I keep coming back to, the part that surprised me most, was that by the time they finally saw it, I had already stopped waiting for the moment.